Dio, no matter what happens, live nobly and with pride. If you do that, you'll surely be able to go to heaven. I wonder if my mother, who always used to tell me that, did indeed go to heaven in the end, although she lived at the bottom rung of society. She lived with pride that she never lost over the whole course of her life. Well, that may be true. Being so, especially being so. No, rather because she was so. I do not think she obtained a ticket to heaven. I don't think so. She was noble, proud, and as well as pure, righteous, and beautiful, and actually even goddess-like. But at the same time, she was a hopelessly foolish woman. I hated that hopeless foolishness. Take this, for example. While we were so impoverished, we had to be worried about eating meals that day, while both she and I, her son, were in an environment where we suffered from having empty stomachs. She shared the paltry sum of money she had worked to earn with hungry children in the neighborhood. And not just with the children, with elderly people, or sometimes animals. She gave charity and blessings to such weaklings like it was her duty. What's the word? Kindness. She would scatter that sort of thing freely to those around her. What was that if not foolishness? One can't help but hate it. Her way of life, where she would put herself, as well as her family, second, was certainly noble and proud, but in that bottom rung of town, there was no one to assess that nobility and pride. Depending on the place, like where the Joestar family lived, that sort of idyllic country town, such character would be reasonably recognized. But in that town, that was worse than a ditch, to be honest. She was a laughingstock. The children who took her charity, as well as the elderly people, all laughed at Mother. They roared with laughter like they were seeing a thoroughly entertaining, hilarious joke being played. When I heard that laughter, it didn't really have much animosity to it. They were absolutely right, I thought. Enough so that I wanted to laugh right along with them. My anger towards my mother took precedence, so of course I didn't do so. But that's to the degree that I felt so. My mother was foolish. Hopelessly foolish. But, be as that may, as you might expect, being the son of the mother who was being made fun of, I was sometimes looked down on, and I couldn't just let those people that were laughing at my mother get away with it. But, when I did that, my mother scolded me. Rather than the ones that were laughing at her, she would scold me that got angry. You mustn't do that, Dio. You must not live relying on violence like that. If you do such things, you will not go to heaven. Thinking back, it was like her favorite phrase. Words themselves have concrete meanings. Maybe they were something like an incantation. Simply saying those things left an impression on me. She need only to say the word heaven, and it felt like she may be saved. Had to think that, because otherwise, that woman's feelings were completely incomprehensible to me. No, even if I did think that, understandably, she was undoubtedly impossible to understand, but thinking back on it now, I feel that it probably brought a reasonable amount of light into her life, in which she was constantly laughed at. But anyhow, she, my mother, took every opportunity to say that to me as a young child. If you do this, you can go to heaven. If you do that, you can't go to heaven. Heaven, heaven, heaven. And every time it irritated me. My childhood mind learned severe irritation. I thought of them as irrational words. I couldn't forgive my mother. That's why whenever I would see my drunken father commit violence against my mother, it actually made me feel relieved. Serves you right, I thought. Thinking about it now seems rather foolish, but as a young child, I liked my father more than my mother. Felt my low-life, insignificant, hopeless father was far better than my noble, proud mother. If my mother was a giver, or perhaps a donor, then I think I could say my father was a taker. Thinking back on my connection with the Joestar family, a faded connection spanning over 100 years, his habit of stealing may have been impetuous. What he took from George Joestar was the cause. I never once saw him work. I never saw him work or earn anything for himself. Through random gambling, swindle-like acts, and extortion, he took cash and food from people in town. He never earned, he only took. He was always doing that. The way he lived his life until his death was the exact opposite of my mother's. And in that town, the one thing that was right was my father. My father's way of living was honest and correct. At the very least, I thought that the way my father lived so uninhibited and cunningly was cool. I wouldn't say I looked up to him, but I would say I respected him. It really does seem foolish looking back on it now, but I was not in my proper senses. But I thought the way he lived as very skillful. He was always taking from the weak, and in response to necessity, or even not in response to necessity, he would beat other people. For me, a still innocent child, one could not be stronger. I watched him. He was strong, stylish, and cool, and in that broken-down slum of a town, knowing that my father was such a person, my life's greatest, my life's only pride. But my mother repudiated that. She downright criticized it. Dear, please stop. Let's give back all the money you stole. You mustn't do these things. If you do things like this, you won't be able to go to heaven. Whenever she said that, she got hit. A foolish woman got foolishly beaten. When she collapsed, he would violently kick her and throw liquor bottles at her. I only found out about it later. But my little brother or sister, that could have been, was lost to that violence apparently. It's a cruel story. It's a cruel story, isn't it? Surely is. But among that daily violence, she was forthright to the end. And that life at the bottom rung of society, in that terrible environment, she talked about justice, ethics, and morals. She held dearly those things that served no purpose, like they were treasures. I wish you'd have just shut up. At least, I wish you'd overlook my father's actions. If you'd just done that, she would at least have accepted his violence. Now, when I think of my father and his drunken frenzies, you probably couldn't escape completely no matter what you did. But when I was a child, in an attempt to do that, I would stay quiet and get away from him when he drank. And that would minimize the amount of damage I received. A child could figure that out, but she never did. Quite the opposite. When my father drank heavily and got drunk off his ass, she remonstrated him. You mustn't drink so much liquor. And the like. She would say obvious things like that. She would get hit and say obvious things. What exactly was going to come from saying things like that? If you thought about it, it shouldn't have been easy to figure out. Seeing her try to talk to my father despite the fact that she did nothing to defend herself from being beaten couldn't be expressed as anything but humorous. It's strange. Couldn't help but question it. Even if she couldn't escape the scorn, she should at least be able to escape the violence. So why didn't she? Is it as I thought? She was simply foolish because she wasn't smart? Was my mother really a hopeless idiot? That is wrong. Now that 100 years have passed, I know that is wrong. Now that I know that so-called outside world and the next world, it's true that my mother at least had intelligence and education. Even my own poverty. I could not go to school often. The one that taught me various things. The one that taught me various of a teacher was none other than her. Because I had that basic education, I was able to live with such determination. Because I had that basic education, I was able to live with such determination later. I didn't think that such an education mother for that while she was alive, though. But if it weren't for that, I didn't think that such an education could serve any purpose. Fine Joestar home. But if it weren't for that, I seriously doubt I could have lived that fine Joestar home. When I did investigate, I found that never cared for my mother's bloodline. Actually come from the upper echelons of society. When I did investigate, I'm allowed to say something about prejudice. I found that woman, her refinement and come from the upper echelons of society, and the piety of hers were at the very least say something about prejudice. Now, they must have been things born out of a life of luxury. And the piety of hers. But why would such a woman marry were at the very least not born out of poverty? Why she fell into they must have been things born out of a life of luxury. I cannot call anything but mysteries. But why would such a woman marry? Speaking of which, that my father once told me something while drunk. Something about him eloping with my mother into this miserable town. How's that for love and romance? I cannot call anything but mysteries. Worthless drivel like that. Speaking of which, my father once told me something nonsense. I don't know whether or not it's actually true, and I ignored it. As it seemed, how's that for love and romance? For to swallow. In some but although I can't confirm it is true. It may not have drunken nonsense either. I don't know whether or not
it's
actually true.
said something truthful,
though there's no way to find out now,
as it seemed
like
like
an
an
incredibly
incredibly
hard story to
Your
swallow.
father is a really kind
But although I
person.
can't confirm that it's
He
true,
just shouldn't drink.
it may not have been
If he only quit
nonsense
drinking,
either.
I'm sure your father would work
Perhaps
diligently.
that father of
No, that
mine
was nonsense,
said something
I thought.
truthful.
My mother said such things,
though
to
there's
me
no
with a
way to
serious look
find
on
out
her
now.
face.
It took all I had not to
your
cry
father.
out against that.
Your father
I
is a
wanted to
really
ask how she
kind
could possibly
person.
be so foolish.
He
He's
just
really a
shouldn't
kind
drink.
person.
If only he
stopped
quit
drinking,
drinking,
I'm sure your father would
where
work
could you
diligently.
look?
Or in what way could you try to explain?
No, that was nonsense,
in
I
order
thought.
for to think in
My
such
mother
a
said
way.
such things
All I
to
could
me
think
with a serious
was
look
that
on
my
her
mother
face.
had lost her mind from being beaten too
It
much.
took all I had
If
not
one
to
assumed
cry
that,
out
one could
against
say that they were
that.
actually very well
I wanted to
matched
ask how
couple.
she could
But
possibly
really,
be so foolish.
no matter how you thought about it, he's
They were
really
an
a
incredibly
kind person.
mismatched couple.
If only he
Despite
stopped
living
drinking,
as
the wife of a low-life father.
How or
For
where
my
could
mother,
you
who
look?
had a principle
Or
to do
in
good,
what way could
who
you
aimed to go to
try
heaven,
to explain
must have been tantamount
in
to
order
torture, or to think
or
in
perhaps
such a way.
for her,
That was the most terrible thing she could
all
do.
I could think
Perhaps she thought that getting
was that
close
my
to
mother
that
had
father
lost her
of
mind
mine from being
remained
too
married
much
to him for life.
was a mission given to her by
If
God.
one assumed that, one
Something
could say
along
that they
those
were actually
lines.
very well matched.
It's an
couple.
audacious
But really,
hypothesis. I have no
no
basis
matter how you
for
thought
it.
about it.
But
They were
unless
an
I think it
incredibly
was something
mismatched
like that,
couple.
I really can't understand it. Despite living as the wife of a
Her life
low-life
is far
father,
too incomprehensible
for my mother,
She
who
was a
had
laughingstock
a
of
principle to
town,
do good,
but she still
who
tried
aimed
to
to go to
help him.
heaven,
She was beaten
must
bloody
have been
by him,
tantamount to
but she
torture.
still tried to serve that
Or
father
perhaps
of
for
mine.
her,
Every day
that
she
was the
worked to
most
the brink of
terrible thing
collapse,
she could
and
do.
seeing as one day she really did
Perhaps
collapse
she
and
thought
passed
that getting
away.
close to that
I
father
really
of
can
mine,
understand her.
who
In the
remained
end,
married to him for life,
I wonder if she
was
did
a
get
mission
to
given
heaven.
to her by God. I don't think she did.
Something
Surely
along
she
those
couldn't go
lines.
anywhere.
It's
She had
an
nowhere
audacious
to arrive
hypothesis.
at. I have no basis
And
for
nowhere
it.
to go back to.
But unless I think it was something like that, I really can't understand it. Her life was far too incomprehensible. She was the laughingstock of the town, but she still tried to help him. She was beaten bloody by him, but she still tried to serve that father of mine. Every day she worked to the brink of collapse, and seeing as one day she really did collapse and passed away, I really can't understand her. In the end, I wonder if she did get to heaven. I don't think she did. Surely she couldn't go anywhere. She had nowhere to arrive at, and nowhere to go back to.